Shadow couldn't stop staring at the attic. Every night, for weeks, his amber eyes fixed on that dark corner of the house. Sergeant Jack Matthews had noticed it too, but he hadn't thought much of it. After all, dogs do strange things sometimes. But tonight, something felt different. Shadow's unblinking gaze was too intense, almost as if he was trying to tell Jack something. Jack walked toward the attic, his boots echoing through the quiet house. It was the middle of the night, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. His hand reached for the old wooden door leading to the attic, but before he touched the handle, Shadow barked once. It wasn't the usual playful bark, it was urgent, commanding. Jack froze, a chill running down his spine. He glanced down at Shadow, who was still staring at the attic door. "What is it, boy?" Jack muttered, more to himself than the dog. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking with an unsettling noise. The attic was dimly lit by a small, dusty window, but nothing seemed out of place. Jack stepped inside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he swept the beam across the room, he paused. In the far corner, behind an old wooden crate, something caught his eye. His heart skipped a beat. It was a small, crumpled-up blanket, but there was no mistaking the shape of what was underneath. Jack's breath hitched. Could it be? He stepped closer, his flashlight flickering nervously in his grip. He knelt down, gently lifting the blanket. Beneath it lay a tiny, barely breathing German Shepherd puppy. Jack's mind raced. "How did you get up here?" he whispered, as if the puppy could answer him. The poor thing was shivering, its small body weak and frail. There was no collar, no tag, just a soft whimper as it tried to lift its head. Jack's heart broke. This puppy had been hiding up here, all alone. How long had it been there? How had Shadow known? As Jack carefully cradled the pup in his arms, he could feel the warmth of Shadow standing beside him, his steady gaze never leaving the small animal. Jack's eyes welled up with tears. "You found him," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Shadow's tail thumped softly on the floor, as if to confirm. Jack stood up, holding the fragile puppy close. His heart ached for the little creature. It had been left behind, abandoned, but not anymore. Shadow had led him here, had kept watch over the pup. There was a bond between them, something deeper than just loyalty. It was a bond of survival, of knowing that sometimes, the only way to make it through the hardest moments is by being there for each other. The puppy whimpered weakly, and Jack tightened his grip, determined to give this little one the life it deserved. As he turned to leave the attic, Shadow followed closely behind, his eyes never leaving the pup. In that moment, Jack realized that Shadow had saved more than just a life tonight. He had saved a piece of his own heart, too. Jack carefully carried the tiny German Shepherd puppy down the stairs, his heart pounding with each step. Shadow walked beside him, his amber eyes fixed on the pup, a steady presence, as if making sure nothing would harm the fragile little creature in Jack's arms. Jack reached the living room and gently placed the puppy on the couch, wrapping a soft blanket around it to keep it warm. He knelt beside the pup, brushing its fur gently, the coldness of its body still haunting his touch. Shadow stood close by, his tail thumping softly against the floor, a silent guardian. Jack's mind raced as he thought about how this little one had been hidden away in the attic, cold, hungry, and alone. How had it gotten there? Why had it been left behind? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered for now. Jack could feel a deep sense of responsibility rising within him. He had to do something. He had to make sure this pup would never experience the pain of abandonment again. He looked at Shadow, who gave him a look of understanding, as if to say, "We will take care of this together." Jack smiled faintly, feeling a bond between him and his loyal K9 grow even stronger. He was no longer just protecting a dog. He was protecting something far more important, a life that needed him. Hours passed, and the little puppy started to show signs of life. It shifted slightly under the blanket, a small whimper escaping its lips. Jack held his breath, watching as the pup's tiny chest rose and fell with each weak breath. Slowly, carefully, Jack extended his hand to the pup, letting it sniff his fingers. The pup's amber eyes fluttered open, and it weakly licked Jack's hand. Jack's heart swelled with emotion as he realized that this small act, this simple gesture, meant the world. The puppy was alive. It had survived. Jack had saved it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something greater was at work here. He looked at Shadow, whose gaze never left the puppy, a sense of pride in his eyes. Jack thought back to the moment when Shadow had led him to the attic. The K9 had been the one to find the pup, to guide Jack toward it when no one else would have noticed. Shadow's loyalty had saved this puppy's life, just as it had saved Jack's many times before. It was as if Shadow knew that no life, no matter how small, should ever be left behind. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhausted but content. He stroked Shadow's fur, grateful for the unwavering companionship of his K9. "We did good, buddy," he whispered, and Shadow let out a soft whine, nuzzling Jack's hand. The bond between them was deeper than ever. It wasn't just about loyalty or duty anymore. It was about something far more powerful: love, compassion, and the belief that no one should ever face the world alone. The days passed, and the little German Shepherd puppy grew stronger, its tiny body warming up, its breathing more even. Jack spent most of his time by its side, watching over it as he had Shadow so many times before. Shadow, ever loyal, never left the puppy's side, sitting beside it as if guarding it from any harm. The bond between the two animals was undeniable, and Jack couldn't help but marvel at the way Shadow instinctively cared for the little pup. He had saved its life, and now it seemed like Shadow was teaching it how to live, just as Jack had been taught in his own life, one lesson at a time. Jack had already started calling the puppy Buddy, though it still wasn't clear whether Buddy would stay or not. The vet had confirmed that the pup had suffered significant trauma from its time alone, but it was healing quickly, thanks to Jack's care and, of course, Shadow's unyielding presence. Jack was surprised at how much his own heart had softened. He had always been a man of action, driven by purpose and duty, but now, with Buddy in his care, he was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be a protector, not just of his country, but of every life he could touch. The quiet moments in the living room, watching Buddy and Shadow together, felt like a form of therapy for Jack. He had seen so much darkness in his life, so many struggles both on the battlefield and in his own personal journey, that it was hard to remember what peace felt like. But with Shadow by his side and now Buddy, Jack was starting to feel like he was finding a piece of that peace, a peace that he had long thought impossible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow through the window, Jack sat down on the couch beside Buddy, who was now more lively and playful. Shadow, as usual, lay at Jack's feet, his head resting on his paws. Jack absent-mindedly scratched Shadow behind the ears, his mind drifting. It wasn't long before Buddy wobbled over to him, nudging his hand with a soft, wet nose. Jack chuckled softly and scratched the puppy's head. "You're getting stronger every day, aren't you, Buddy?" Jack said, his voice low and warm. As the puppy rolled onto its back, playfully kicking its legs in the air, Jack smiled, the weight of the world feeling a little lighter in that moment. The sound of Shadow's steady breathing, the warmth of Buddy's tiny body pressed against his side, reminded Jack that sometimes the most important thing was simply to be there, to protect, to care, to be a constant presence in the lives of those who needed it most. Jack had spent so much of his life fighting battles, both on the field and within himself, but now he realized that this quiet life he had found with Shadow and Buddy was just as important, if not more so. It was about love, loyalty, and the power of second chances. The next morning, Jack awoke to the sound of Buddy's playful barks. He smiled, getting up from his bed and walking into the living room to find Buddy rolling around on the floor, tail wagging. Shadow, ever the patient teacher, watched from his favorite spot by the window. Jack knelt down, lifting Buddy into his arms. "You've come a long way, little guy," Jack murmured. As he looked at Shadow, then back at Buddy, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He had never imagined that the greatest gift he would receive after his service would be a bond so pure, a bond between him and two animals who had shown him what true loyalty and love really meant. Jack woke up to the sound of soft paws padding across the floor. It was early, the lights still dim and the house quiet. He slowly opened his eyes and saw Shadow, as usual, lying at the foot of the bed, looking up at him with those amber eyes. The puppy, Buddy, was sitting next to him, tilting his head curiously as Jack stretched. It had been a few weeks since Buddy's arrival, and Jack was amazed at how much the little guy had grown. He was no longer the frail, shivering puppy he'd found in the attic. Now, Buddy had a bit of energy, chasing after Shadow's tail or rolling around the living room, trying to mimic Shadow's movements. Jack smiled as he got out of bed. "You two are inseparable, huh?" he said quietly, his voice thick with affection. He walked into the kitchen, making his usual morning coffee, the scent filling the air. Shadow followed closely behind, and Buddy, after a moment of hesitation, joined them as well, his little legs stumbling to keep up. Jack watched the two dogs interact, feeling a warmth spread through him. The house, once filled with the silence of a man who had seen too much, was now alive with energy. Buddy's little barks and Shadow's calm presence filled the space, making it feel like a home in ways Jack hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. It was about family. As Jack sipped his coffee, he thought about the road ahead. The past had left its scars, some deeper than others, but with Shadow and Buddy by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. They had both been through so much, and yet they were still here. They had found a way to heal together. Jack had always been someone who kept moving forward, who focused on the mission, no matter what. But now, he realized that there was more to life than just pushing through. Sometimes, it was about slowing down and appreciating the quiet moments. Those moments when you could just sit and be with the ones you loved. As the day went on, Jack and the dogs took a walk outside. The sun was beginning to rise higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape. Shadow trotted ahead, nose in the air, while Buddy followed close behind, still learning how to navigate the world around him. Jack's mind drifted to the days before Buddy, when it was just him and Shadow. They had made it through so much together. But with Buddy now part of their lives, something felt different, something deeper. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about healing, and it was about love. They made their way down the dirt path behind the house, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude. He wasn't sure what had brought him to this point, but he knew that these two dogs had saved him in ways he couldn't quite explain. As Buddy barked excitedly, running ahead of Shadow, Jack couldn't help but laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. He realized that this was what he had needed all along: companionship, love, and a second chance to rebuild his life. Shadow, who had always been his protector, was now teaching him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, it's okay to let go of the past and embrace the future. Jack looked down at Buddy, who had stopped and was looking up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "We're in this together, little guy," Jack murmured. And as the sun continued to rise, Jack knew that with Shadow and Buddy by his side, there was no obstacle too great for them to face. The days had become a rhythm of comfort and peace, a stark contrast to the life Jack had known before. With Shadow always by his side and Buddy growing stronger every day, Jack felt like he was finally living in a world where the noise and chaos of his past no longer ruled him. Each morning, the trio would take their walks down the same familiar dirt path behind the house, the sun rising higher with each step. Jack, Shadow, and Buddy had their routine, and with each passing day, they grew closer. Jack had become accustomed to the sound of Buddy's excited barks, his tail wagging uncontrollably as he chased after Shadow. The playful energy of the puppy filled the air, and Jack couldn't help but smile every time Buddy tried to keep up with the older German Shepherd. Shadow, ever patient, would slow down just enough for Buddy to catch up before taking off again, leading the way like a seasoned guide. There was something about the way Shadow looked after Buddy that Jack couldn't quite explain. It was more than just loyalty. It was a deep, unspoken bond between the two dogs. They understood each other in a way that only animals could, and watching them together, Jack realized that they had formed a family of their own. It wasn't just about protecting each other. It was about love, trust, and companionship. One afternoon, as Jack sat on the porch, watching the two dogs run around the yard, he thought about how far they had come. It had been months since he had first found Buddy in the attic, weak and alone. Now, Buddy was thriving, his coat shining, his eyes bright with curiosity. Shadow, though older, was still as strong and vigilant as ever, always looking out for both Jack and Buddy. Jack ran his hand through his hair and leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. He thought about the life he had once lived, how he had been defined by his past, by the missions he had gone on, and the battles he had fought. But now, here he was, surrounded by the quiet comfort of his home, with Shadow and Buddy by his side. It wasn't the life he had expected, but it was a life he had come to cherish. In the distance, Jack saw Buddy stumble over a small rock, tumbling to the ground in a heap. For a moment, Jack's heart stopped, but before he could react, Shadow was there, nudging the puppy with his nose and encouraging him to get back up. Buddy, with a little help, stood up, shaking the dirt off his coat, and bounded after Shadow again, eager to continue their play. Jack's heart swelled with pride as he watched them. It wasn't just that Shadow had been there for Buddy, it was that he had shown him how to get up after falling, how to keep going no matter what. In that moment, Jack realized that his own journey had been much like Buddy's. There had been times when he had fallen, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But like Buddy, he had learned to get back up, to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And like Shadow, he had found the strength to help others along the way. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the yard, Jack felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. With Shadow and Buddy by his side, he was ready for whatever the future held. The weeks continued to pass peacefully. Jack, Shadow, and Buddy had settled into a rhythm, each day blending into the next like the steady, unbroken beat of a heart. Jack had finally come to terms with the quiet life he now led. Gone were the days of constant movement, the urgent missions, the adrenaline-fueled nights. Instead, he found fulfillment in the simplicity of daily routines, morning walks, the quiet moments spent on the porch, and the growing bond between him and the two dogs. One evening, as they returned from a long walk through the woods, Jack noticed Buddy lagging behind. At first, he thought nothing of it. The puppy was still learning the ways of the world, after all. But when Buddy didn't catch up as usual, Jack turned around, his heart tightening. He found the little dog sitting on the path, staring up at him with wide eyes, almost as if waiting for something. Jack knelt down beside him. "What's wrong, Buddy?" he asked softly. Buddy let out a small whimper, his body trembling slightly. Shadow, ever the protective companion, moved closer, nudging Buddy gently with his nose. Jack reached out to reassure the puppy, rubbing his back. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now," he whispered. But something was different this time. As he spoke, he realized that Buddy wasn't trembling from fear. There was something deeper, something that Jack couldn't quite place. He stood up, brushing off the dirt from his pants. "Let's go home, Buddy," Jack said, his voice full of warmth. Buddy looked up at him, then slowly stood and followed Jack, the energy slowly returning to his tiny legs. As they walked back toward the house, Jack couldn't help but wonder what had caused Buddy's sudden moment of stillness. It wasn't like the playful puppy to hesitate, especially with Shadow always by his side, keeping him safe. When they finally reached the porch, Jack gently lifted Buddy into his arms, carrying him inside. Shadow followed closely, his protective gaze never leaving the little dog. Jack set Buddy down on the couch, the puppy curling up in a ball with a soft sigh. As Jack sat beside him, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. There was something special about this little dog, something Jack couldn't quite put into words. Buddy had found his way into Jack's heart in a way that went beyond simple companionship. He had brought something new into Jack's life, a sense of purpose, a reason to care, a reason to protect. And as Jack stroked Buddy's soft fur, he knew that this was where he was meant to be. Not in the chaos of the world he had left behind, but in this quiet life with Shadow and Buddy, where love and loyalty meant everything. As the night grew darker, Jack found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken to get here. He had been through so much, had seen the worst of humanity, and had come out the other side, scarred but stronger. But it wasn't the battles that had shaped him. It was the quiet moments like this one, the small gestures of care and love, that had truly changed him. He looked at Shadow, who was lying by the door, keeping watch as always. Jack smiled softly, his heart full. "We've got this, Buddy," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Shadow, to Buddy, or to himself. The three of them, together, had found a new kind of family, one built on trust, loyalty, and unconditional love. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a soft light across the fields behind the house. Jack stood on the porch, watching as Shadow and Buddy played in the yard. Shadow, always the protective one, ran circles around the puppy, his movements graceful and fluid. Buddy, still small but full of energy, bounced around trying to catch up, his little tail wagging like a metronome. It had become a familiar scene over the past few weeks. one that Jack had come to look forward to each day. There was something peaceful about watching the two of them, as if everything in the world had finally found its balance. Jack had learned, over time, that healing wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, it was simply about being present, about showing up for the ones you loved, even when the days felt long and uncertain. Shadow had shown him that in more ways than one. As Jack watched, he felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been through so much in his life, things he never wanted to face again. But now, with these two loyal companions by his side, he had found something worth living for. He had found peace. Buddy, now a little more confident, ran over to Jack, his eyes bright with excitement. The puppy was still learning the world around him, but Jack could see how much he had already grown. He was no longer the frail little creature Jack had found in the attic, but a lively, curious dog, full of promise. Jack knelt down and scooped him up, feeling the warmth of his small body in his arms. "You're getting bigger every day, aren't you?" Jack murmured, scratching the puppy behind the ears. Buddy responded with a soft yip and licked Jack's hand, his tail wagging even harder. Jack smiled, the weight of everything he had been through slowly lifting. Shadow trotted over, his head held high, as if proud of the puppy's progress. Jack's heart swelled with affection for both of them. He couldn't imagine his life without them. In that moment, Jack realized how much they had all changed. He had come to this place, this quiet life, not by accident, but by choice. He had chosen to open his heart to Shadow and Buddy, to let them into his world, and in return, they had helped him find his way back to himself. Shadow had been his anchor, his constant companion through the darkest times. And now, with Buddy by his side, Jack knew he had something to fight for again. He had a family, a bond that went beyond words. As the day went on, Jack and the dogs spent the afternoon outside, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze. They played, they rested, and they simply enjoyed each other's company. It was a quiet, simple life, but it was everything Jack had ever needed. He didn't need the chaos or the noise of his past. What mattered now was the present, the moments he shared with Shadow and Buddy. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the yard, Jack sat on the porch, watching the dogs settle down beside him. Shadow rested his head on Jack's feet, while Buddy curled up in Jack's lap, content and at peace. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he had finally found where he belonged. It was a warm evening, the kind that made the air feel soft and light, like the world itself was taking a deep breath. Jack stood on the porch, looking out over the quiet land that stretched before him. Shadow and Buddy were nearby, resting in the grass, both content, their soft breaths blending with the rustling of the trees in the breeze. The sounds of nature filled the air, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of an owl, and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt truly at peace. There was no rush, no chaos, no haunting memories of the past. Just the present, and it was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's life continued on this quiet path, with the companionship of Shadow and Buddy grounding him in ways he hadn't known he needed. There was no more feeling like he was just surviving. He wasn't merely getting by. He was living, fully and completely, with a sense of calm that had eluded him for so long. One afternoon, as the three of them were out for a walk, Jack felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He glanced down at Buddy, who was happily bouncing along beside him, and then over at Shadow, who trotted calmly ahead, ever watchful, as always. The bond between the three of them had grown so deep over the past months. Shadow had shown him what it meant to truly trust, and Buddy had taught him how to love again, in a way he hadn't realized was possible. They were more than just pets, more than just animals he had cared for. They were family. As they continued down the dirt path behind the house, Jack found himself reflecting on the changes in his life. He had once felt so lost, like there was no place for him in this world after all he had been through. But now, standing there with Shadow and Buddy at his side, he realized that the world had a way of surprising you, of giving you exactly what you needed when you least expected it. They walked for hours, lost in their own rhythm, until the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. Jack sat down on a nearby rock, feeling the warmth of the day slowly fading into the coolness of evening. Buddy curled up at his feet, while Shadow lay beside him, both of them content and still. Jack took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, feeling the tension that had once gripped him slowly dissipate. The stillness of the moment felt perfect, as if the entire universe had paused just for them. He looked at his two companions, the dogs who had become his anchor in this world, and smiled. He knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. With Shadow's unwavering loyalty and Buddy's infectious joy, Jack felt a sense of hope that he hadn't thought possible. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a family, and that was all he needed. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, Jack stood up, brushing off the dirt from his pants. He reached down and ruffled Buddy's fur, then gave Shadow a gentle pat on the head. Together, they walked back to the house, their footsteps soft on the earth beneath them. Jack didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He had everything he needed right there by his side. The seasons continued to change, and as the days grew longer, Jack found himself spending more time outdoors with Shadow and Buddy. The house, once quiet and still, now echoed with the sounds of their playful footsteps, the laughter of the puppy, and the calm, steady presence of Shadow. It felt like a home, in the truest sense of the word. The simple act of tending to the garden, the small tasks that came with living in this peaceful place, had become part of Jack's routine. He had never imagined that such a life would bring him the kind of fulfillment he now felt. The weight of his past was still there, of course, but it no longer defined him. It had become just one chapter in a story that was still being written. One afternoon, as Jack sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, he noticed Buddy and Shadow playing together in the yard. The puppy had grown even more confident in recent weeks, bounding through the grass with an energy that was contagious. Shadow, though older, moved with the same grace and agility he always had, but now there was a tenderness in his eyes as he watched Buddy, as if he were passing on the lessons of survival, loyalty, and love that he had learned over the years. Jack smiled as he watched them, realizing just how much these two dogs had changed his life. They had become his family in a way that he had never thought possible. Buddy, with his endless energy and curiosity, had brought a sense of joy back into Jack's life that he hadn't felt in a long time. Shadow, with his steadfast loyalty and quiet strength, had been a constant reminder of what it meant to be truly devoted to someone. As the days went on, Jack found that he no longer spent his time reflecting on the past. Instead, he lived in the present, cherishing each moment he shared with Shadow and Buddy. There were still challenges, of course, but now they didn't feel as insurmountable. With the support of his two dogs, Jack knew that he could face whatever came his way. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow across the yard, Jack sat on the porch, watching the two dogs rest at his feet. He felt a sense of contentment, of peace, that he hadn't known in years. The world, for the first time in a long time, felt right. Buddy, now fully settled into his new life, had started to follow Jack around the yard, his tiny steps quick and eager. Shadow, as always, stayed close by, watching over both of them with quiet vigilance. Jack looked at them both, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew that his life had been forever changed by these two dogs. They had brought him back to life in ways he couldn't have imagined. The years of loneliness, of carrying the weight of his past, had melted away in the warmth of their companionship. He didn't need anything more. As the night grew darker and the stars began to appear overhead, Jack sat back, feeling the cool breeze on his face. He closed his eyes, knowing that with Shadow and Buddy by his side, he had everything he could ever need. The future, whatever it held, was theirs to face together. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself adapting more and more to this new life, a life filled with peace, love, and the quiet companionship of Shadow and Buddy. The house, which once felt empty and cold, now felt like home. The constant presence of his two dogs brought a sense of purpose that Jack had longed for, even if he hadn't realized it at the time. The mornings were spent in the familiar routine of feeding the dogs, taking walks around the property, and enjoying the simple beauty of the world around him. Jack had never imagined that such simplicity could bring so much fulfillment. But it did. One morning, as Jack walked down the path toward the edge of the woods, he noticed how the landscape had changed. The trees were beginning to show the first signs of autumn, their leaves turning shades of red, orange, and yellow. It was a reminder of how much time had passed since he had first arrived here. Shadow, always ahead, was already sniffing the air, alert as ever, while Buddy bounded along beside Jack, his small legs carrying him with surprising speed. Jack chuckled softly at the sight of Buddy, now fully grown, but still with the same boundless energy he'd had when Jack first found him. Buddy's presence had transformed Jack's life in ways he hadn't expected. The puppy, once fragile and alone, had become a vibrant, playful companion. And Shadow, always by Jack's side, had shown him what true loyalty meant. Together, they had created a bond that Jack never thought he would find again. As they reached the clearing at the edge of the woods, Jack stopped for a moment, taking in the view. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the landscape. He could feel the calm in the air, the serenity that surrounded him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. Shadow came to sit beside him, while Buddy, full of energy, ran in circles, chasing after a butterfly. Jack smiled at the sight. It was a moment of pure contentment, a moment that felt like it was meant to be. As the days passed, Jack began to realize that the healing he had experienced wasn't just about the time he had spent here. It was about the love and loyalty of his two dogs. They had shown him how to live again, how to appreciate the little things in life, and how to find joy in the simplest moments. Jack's thoughts drifted to the past, to the battles he had fought, both on the field and within himself. He had always believed that strength came from enduring pain and pushing through. But now, with Shadow and Buddy by his side, he understood that true strength came from love, from opening yourself up to the ones who cared about you, and from letting go of the weight of the past. The bond between Jack, Shadow, and Buddy was something he had never experienced before. It was a bond built on trust, loyalty, and love, three things that Jack had once thought were lost to him. But now, with these two dogs by his side, Jack knew that he had found something more valuable than anything he had ever fought for. As the sun began to set that evening, casting long shadows across the yard, Jack sat on the porch, Shadow by his feet, Buddy curled up beside him. He watched as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above. It was a quiet moment, but it was perfect. Jack felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. He was no longer alone. He had found his family, and with them, he had found a peace that would last a lifetime. The days continued to unfold peacefully for Jack, Shadow, and Buddy. Each morning, the air was fresh and crisp, filled with the sounds of birds singing and the occasional rustle of leaves. It was a time of healing, not just for Jack, but for the two dogs as well. They had become his companions in ways that went beyond simple friendship. They had become his family, showing him what true connection and loyalty meant. Jack had started to embrace this new life fully, no longer haunted by the shadows of his past. The house, which once felt like a place to simply survive, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could breathe, think, and just be. One afternoon, as Jack sat outside in the garden, watching the two dogs play together, he realized just how much he had come to depend on them. Shadow, the wise and loyal protector, had always been there for him, silently watching over him through thick and thin. And Buddy, the spirited puppy who had come into his life when it seemed there was no more room for joy, had filled the emptiness Jack hadn't known he had. Buddy, though still young, had grown into a strong and confident dog. He had learned so much from Shadow, watching the older German shepherd with admiration. It was as if the two dogs had created their own little world, one that Jack was lucky enough to be a part of. The bond between them had become something Jack had never experienced before, something pure and unbreakable. The days were simple, but they were full of moments that made Jack feel alive. There were no more rushes to the front lines, no more battles to fight. Just the steady rhythm of life with his dogs, the moments spent in the garden or on the porch, watching the world go by. Jack had found peace in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the evening, when the sky was painted with the soft hues of sunset. It wasn't the life he had expected, but it was the life he had found, and he was grateful for it. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jack sat on the porch, Shadow resting at his feet, Buddy curled up beside him. He looked out over the land, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The past no longer held the same weight it once had. The future was uncertain, but Jack knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had his dogs, his family, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. As Buddy let out a soft sigh in his sleep, Jack smiled to himself. There was no more need for the armor he had worn for so long. He had found something better, something worth fighting for. And with Shadow and Buddy by his side, Jack knew he had everything he needed to face whatever came next. As the seasons shifted once again, Jack felt a deep sense of fulfillment settle in his heart. The days had become a predictable rhythm, a cycle that brought a peaceful comfort he had never known. Every morning, he would wake up to the soft rustling of leaves outside his window, the warmth of the rising sun filling the room. Shadow and Buddy, now both in their prime, were a constant presence in his life. Their companionship had become the foundation of Jack's new world, a world far from the noise and chaos of the life he once led. One morning, as the sun bathed the yard in a soft golden light, Jack decided to take a walk down the old dirt path that led to the edge of the woods. He had spent so many days here, walking with his dogs, and yet each time he ventured down this path, it felt like a new journey. He had come to appreciate the simple beauty of the landscape, the towering trees, the gentle breeze, the quiet stillness that only nature could offer. Shadow, as always, was ahead, his strong, steady pace never faltering. Buddy, full of energy, ran ahead and then circled back to Jack, as if checking to make sure he was still there. Jack smiled, knowing that the puppy had grown into a strong, independent dog. The bond between the three of them had deepened over time. It wasn't just about shared experiences anymore. It was about understanding, about knowing each other in a way that only those who had been through difficult times together could. As Jack walked, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The past still lingered in the corners of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. He had learned that true strength wasn't about fighting battles or pushing through pain. It was about accepting the help of those who cared, about allowing himself to heal. Shadow had taught him that. The older dog had always been a silent guide, a steady presence that never wavered. And Buddy, with his youthful exuberance, had brought joy back into Jack's life, reminding him that there was always room for happiness, no matter the scars of the past. When they reached the clearing by the stream, Jack stopped for a moment, watching as Shadow dipped his paws into the water, while Buddy playfully tried to chase the fish that swam just out of reach. Jack knelt down beside the stream, feeling the cool water rush past his fingers. It was moments like this that reminded him how much he had gained, how much his life had changed since that first day he had found Buddy, and how Shadow had always been there, guiding him through. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip behind the trees, Jack felt a deep sense of contentment. He didn't need anything more than what he had right now. With Shadow by his side and Buddy playing at his feet, Jack knew he had everything he needed to face the future. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had built something new, something beautiful, and he wasn't alone. The future was bright, and Jack felt ready for whatever it held, knowing that, no matter what, he would face it with Shadow and Buddy beside him. As the years passed, Jack, Shadow, and Buddy settled into a peaceful rhythm that filled their lives with quiet joy. The once distant memories of Jack's past, of the struggles and battles he had fought, now seemed like distant echoes, fading with each new day. He had found solace in the companionship of his dogs, in the small, everyday moments that had become the heart of his life. The days were long, but they were good. One afternoon, as Jack sat on the porch, watching Buddy and Shadow play in the yard, he felt a sense of contentment that he had never known before. Shadow, as always, moved with a quiet strength, his movements graceful despite the years that had passed. Buddy, now fully grown and strong, still had that same joyful energy he had shown as a puppy, chasing after sticks and running in circles. Jack smiled, knowing that these two dogs had become more than just companions. They had become his family. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the yard, Jack stood up and walked toward the two dogs. They both stopped what they were doing and turned toward him, their eyes bright with affection. Shadow gave a low, contented growl, and Buddy wagged his tail, eager for Jack's attention. Jack crouched down and rubbed Buddy's ears, the puppy's soft fur warm beneath his hand. He looked over at Shadow, who stood tall beside him, ever watchful, ever loyal. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boys?" Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He had come to understand the meaning of true loyalty, of love that didn't need words to be understood. Shadow and Buddy had shown him that. They had shown him how to live again, how to find joy in the simple moments, and how to trust in something bigger than himself. As the days grew shorter and the weather grew colder, Jack continued to find comfort in the quiet life he had built with his dogs. There were still hard days, moments when the weight of the past threatened to creep back into his thoughts, but those moments were fewer now. He had learned to face them with the strength that Shadow and Buddy had shown him, to walk forward with hope, knowing that he wasn't walking alone. One evening, as Jack sat by the fire, Buddy curled up at his feet and Shadow lying beside him, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The road had been long, but it had led him to something better than he had ever imagined. He had found peace, not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of those who cared for him unconditionally. Jack looked at the two dogs, his heart full of gratitude. They had saved him in ways that words could never capture. And now, as the fire crackled softly and the stars began to appear in the sky above, Jack knew that this was the life he had always been meant to live, with love, with loyalty, and with the kind of family that no one could take away.